Welcome to the Onto Islam Becoming Muslim podcast. In this episode, we talk to Noor Saadeh. She is an American convert to Islam. She has been a practicing Muslim for over 30 years now. She is a former concert and opera singer performing in New York City and abroad. And as a Muslim, Noor turned her talents to writing songs and stories for Muslim children growing up in the West. In this episode, she talks about music in Islam, alcohol in Islam, Islam as a merciful religion, services for new Muslims in the USA, learning Islam at your own pace, the needs of new converts, and the roadblocks that people who are thinking about converting to Islam may face. Welcome to the show, Noor.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you. Pleasure to be with you today. We're in Dallas, Texas, talking to you today.
Great. Excellent. Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you for coming onto the show, Noor. Yeah, we're coming to you from Amman at the moment. So the first time I noticed you was on YouTube. I typed into the search, I typed in convert to Islam, and one of your videos came up on the top page for the search rank. It was an interview you did with Plaid for Women.
Yes, Plaid for Women with
plaidforwomen.com. Yeah. Uh-huh. And it was really interesting. I listened to the whole thing. And then at the end, you mentioned your contact details was for noorart.com. Mm-hmm. So I sent you an email and asked you to come onto the show.
Okay, that's how all that transpired. And that's an amazing little video, I think, because it's a dialogue. Siobhan and I are actually very good friends. And I think the camaraderie is almost what kind of sells that particular video. But we are just astounded at the number of views on that particular video. There's a gentleman in Egypt that picked up on that, and he posts it regularly every few months. He reposts it. So it's had an amazing amazing number of views. Quite surprising to me, but I'm happy for that. Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, it was a good interview. You guys covered a lot of important topics. So tell me a little bit about this Plaid for Women. What are you doing there?
Plaid for Women is an online platform for basically for women, and it covers so many topics. It just talks about the business of life. And it talks in business, it talks finances, it talks inspirational stories, religious beliefs. It covers the gamut of the lives we lead as women nowadays. And there are a number of women who regularly blog for this particular platform. And I met the CEO of the company some time ago. I'm not quite sure how she heard about me, but we met and we were just immediately companions and friends and soul sisters. And we had a great relationship. And she asked me to blog, and I think I'm still the only Muslim blogger, and I tend to write a lot about religion and having Islam, clearing up the stereotypes and the misconceptions, but also showing how relevant it is for our lives as women, and that it doesn't hold us back as women, and it actually helps us propel ourselves and gives us a nice, firm foundation for us to go forward in our lives. But it's great about helping me to clear up stereotypes about Muslim women throughout the world. And that, with our religion and even dressing as a Muslim in a covered sort of way, the sky's the limit for us. There's so much that we can do. And we're free to do that. We're very liberated in a way to do that. I feel that sometimes other women are not, because we don't have the confines of how we look about our hair and our makeup and our clothing so much to be worried about. And that gives us like this kind of modest covering that we wear that identifies us as Muslim. Gives us a lot of freedom, and I think you might hear that from a lot of Muslim women, that it's a freeing factor as opposed to an oppressive factor. And it's something that most women in the world choose to wear rather than being forced to wear or coerced to wear. As is most of the religion of Islam, it's all about choice. And there's a beautiful verse that's in a very prominent position in the Quran that says there is no compulsion in religion. And I know for a lot of people who aren't Muslim, that's like, what? Islam came by the sword and all this other kind of rhetoric that we hear. But it follows up on a very beautiful verse about Allah, talking about who God is and what he's not, and how different he is than we are. He doesn't need to eat or sleep, and he's aware of the past, present, and future. He knows everything about us. He's closer to us than our jugular veins. We have this very beautiful description of God in the Quran. And then it's followed up by this verse that says, yes, but there's no compulsion in believing that God wants you to come to him, fully convinced and fully ready to be obedient and submissive to what he asks you to do. because of all these great qualities that we learn about as we read the Quran.
So, you've been a Muslim now for 30 years. That's a long time for a lot of people. I was reading your bio and you mentioned that you were a opera singer back before you were a Muslim. So can you tell our listeners out there a bit about your life before you accepted Islam?
I grew up in central Wisconsin in the Midwest, in the upper Midwest, the United States, in a very, very white area, very German, Germanic, Dutch, Scandinavian. We had no people of color, but I was just always interested in knowing other people and knowing the differences of people, which again, it reflects another lovely verse in the Quran that talks about that God created us differently to know one another. And I was very blessed as a child, even though there was quite a lot of racism around me, that I was interested in other people. I had friends of all the foreign exchange students in high school. But I had started off early loving music, loving the sounds of harmony, and my parents were amateur musicians, so I grew up with a lot of music in the house. But I also had a bent for classical music from a very early age and had the opportunity. I could sing and also played piano, and I started performing in a little group of girls when I was very young, about 8 years old. So I started performing, singing when I was very young and went into middle school and took leads in the school musicals, high school, same thing, and was able to take a lot of classes that focused on the arts and humanities, languages and things like this in high school. And about that time, I decided that I was interested in being a classical performer. I loved classical music. I had gifts for it. And even back in high school, I started doing a lot of what might be considered interfaith. It was a popular time for the folk guitar and folk singing. And even though I grew up not in the Catholic faith, a friend of mine was Catholic and was participating in folk guitar masses. And she had just invited all her friends from high school to join her. So we had kind of an interfaith club singing, children of all different denominations singing at the Catholic Church because we liked the whole guitar and folk singing type of idea. So that was an early kind of exposure to interfaith. Got into college, majored in music, and once out of college started, I love to act as well as sing, so that kind of translated into opera. And I loved concert work, which is a soloist on stage with concert and orchestra, and a lot of it very religious music. Did a lot of internships with opera companies and different musical events during the summer, and eventually after many, many years, got to New York City and started performing at a small and kind of regional level there. But at the same time, what starving singers do in New York City is you get a church job. So you get hired as a soloist for church choirs and actually synagogue jobs too. So I had an opportunity to sing in a lot of big churches in New York City of many different denominations, and also Jewish synagogues. I would sing the High Holy Days, which is quite a lot of music in the Jewish tradition for in the Catskill Mountains in New York City, which is quite famous outside of New York City. And we were flown in quartets and so forth, were flown into different large communities in the United States to help them celebrate their holidays as well. So I had a great deal of exposure to Reform and conservative Reform Judaism and many different types of Christianity. And as a singer, you kind of lead the worship service as well, along with the clergy. So I was very much part and parcel of that. So there was a lot of exposure to the monotheistic religions and what people believed in the different sects within that. And happily was singing very well in New York City. I was part of the New York Choral Artists, which is the chorus of the New York Philharmonic, 100 of the best voices, young voices in New York City, which was a wonderful opportunity to sing with the great conductors, the great orchestras, the great soloists that would come through New York. And did quite a lot of solo work myself in different organizations in New York City and the regional areas there, concerts and opera and so forth. So living in this big city, and I was in my early 30s and having the time of my life, this great occupation of being a professional singer. And I loved coffee too much, and I was always finding little coffee haunts that brewed their coffee and had extremely wonderful coffee in New York City. And I moved into a new neighborhood and couldn't find decent coffee. And suddenly I noticed a little store that opened up in my neighborhood called Coffee and Sweet, and looked in, very small store with just desserts and coffee, and kind of a bearded, long-haired man in there. And I thought, not sure about this. But I went in one day and the coffee was amazing. And the proprietor was very polite and rather gallant in a way I wasn't used to from most men in New York City. And the coffee was amazing. And I used to go back in for coffee and we got talking, and he was from Egypt. And as I said, growing up, I was always rather interested in people who were from other countries and finding out about them. So we got into a great discussion. I said, oh, wonderful. Tell me about Egypt. Tell me about Pharaoh and the pyramids and everything. And as we talked, he said he was a Muslim. And I said, well, I'm really sorry to tell you, I'm, in my middle 30s. I don't know anything about Islam, but I'd love to know. So what's it all about? And he started to tell me how it was the most monotheistic of the monotheistic religions. And I thought, wait, what? Islam, I think, is one of those Eastern religions, which means plurality of gods, right? Like Hindu, Buddhism, these things. He's no. Very, very monotheistic. And it's part of the Judeo-Christian tradition. And I was shocked. I had no such knowledge of any such thing. And I was well-traveled, well-read, and thought myself, quite a knowledgeable, worldly person. And he began to talk about the different prophets and messengers mentioned in the Quran, and started with Adam and Noah and Moses and Jesus. And I said, wait, what are you talking about? These are the same people we have in the Bible. And he said, well, yes, it's a continuation. It came to confirm the Bible and the Torah, and it came to correct some of the mistakes that had been made by the hands of man. And it came to complete those books as a final revelation. I was just astounded. And kind of like a fish that somebody threw a very tasty worm to, I grabbed onto this and hung on. I was so fascinated. And the coffee was amazing. And I kept going back into his shop for coffee and more information about this religion I knew nothing about, but that sounded and seemed so practical and logical and wonderful. And it wasn't anything that I didn't already believe in. It just sort of sorted all the pieces out, and puzzle pieces fell together historically and religiously of the many, many things I had questions about all my life, and that I had asked clergy over the years, and that they never could seem to explain to me, or they would kick me out of a class for asking too many questions. So I was really quite amazed. And one day I came in and he was reading this beautiful book with this gorgeous calligraphy. And as a musical artist, I also have an eye for an art as well. And I was very taken with that. And I said, oh, this must be your beautiful book. And it really was beautiful. There was gold edging on it, and the calligraphy was so gorgeous. And I said, oh, I suppose I would have to learn the Arabic language. He said, no, we have the meaning in English. And some friends of his brought me a translation in English, of the meaning in English the next day. And I started to read, and a little bit with his help for asking questions, I just started reading. He pointed out, you might want to read about Jesus in the Quran. So he pointed out Surah 5, Al-Ma'idah, the table spread, and the story of Imran, which is the lineage of Jesus, and then another chapter, which is the story of Miriam, the mother of Jesus. So I read these, and the more I read, I really felt that the best way I could describe it is that puzzle pieces were coming together. I had a very, very sound and solid idea of who God was and what he does for us, and that it's very, very monotheistic, that God is so unique and different than anything else of his creation, that the idea that God could have a son that was half man or half God, or however people begin to explain it, didn't seem possible any longer. Although Jesus was held as a great, great messenger. The stories of his miracles are in the Quran, the stories of his miraculous birth, and that part and parcel of being a Muslim was that you had to believe in Jesus, had to believe in Moses, had to believe in Abraham, and many of the same messengers and prophets and great righteous people that we've heard of in the Bible. We had to believe in them as much as a Muslim believes in Muhammad, who simply was another messenger or prophet given the revelation of the Quran. So sometimes people are confused that we worship Muhammad, which we don't. It's told to us over and over again that Muhammad is merely a messenger who comes to give good news to people and also a warning, and that he was one of many messengers sent to people when the guidance of God that was given to Adam and given to Noah, given to all these messengers, when people started to go astray from this guidance and begin to kind of think, well, I have a better idea of how to do this than God does. And people begin to change their holy books or change the way God was worshipped. And God in his mercy would send another messenger or prophet to sort of straighten people out and call them back to the original word of God. And that all made such tremendous sense to me. I'm really a very pragmatic person. So the pragmatism and the logic of Quran really, really appealed to me from the get-go. And it still does. It's still one of the things I talk the most about, that it's logical. It has this emotional quality, and the beauty of if it's sort of poetic at times, but it's very pragmatic and very logical. And sometimes that's what I felt was missing in religion, that there was a lot of blind faith for things that didn't make sense, but you should just believe it because we tell you to believe it. And I don't find that in Islam. I don't find that in my reading of Quran. It's very straightforward. And as many converts have said, a lot of the missing puzzle pieces or the questions that we had, we found very clear answers for. And something that I appreciate so much that Allah reiterates again and again in the Quran is that He will say, make an example of something and then say, don't you see, don't you hear, don't you think? So thinking is a very high level. Being knowledgeable, reading, the first word of the revelation of Quran is to read or recite. Reading is held up as a very high goal in Islam, and that everyone should be educated, male and female, both, and that knowledge is always held up at a higher level than anything else. So it's an amazing book, an amazing religion that instead of saying your first command from God is to pray or to obey or submit, it's actually read. So how do we start to know who God is in a way, other than seeing his signs in the universe? Also, we read. And we have this great book that has been promised to us that cannot be changed and that will stay with us until the end of time. And that's a very long-winded story. Sorry about that.
That's okay, Saadeh. Thank you.
Being Muslim 30 years, I have a lot of perspective, and I do get asked to speak a lot. So there's always a lot.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I really appreciate your words here. So you mentioned, like, when you back in this day in the coffee shop, this was 1990, that you didn't know anything about Islam.
Nothing.
So why do you think it is that the people that are educated, they don't know about Islam?
Well, I think we're learning more about it now, but unfortunately, we're learning a lot of negativity. One of my questions to my Egyptian friend was not only why don't I know about this, but why does no one else? Why does no one know about this? And I said, my first thought was, who's been hiding this information? Immediately, I kind of went to this conspiracy idea that why is this information withheld? Because we pride ourselves in America on being a Judeo-Christian country. And in reality, we're a Judeo-Christian Islamic country. But I think so far, even going into libraries, for example, if you go to a bookstore, even today, if you go to a bookstore or you go to a Barnes and Noble or whatever, a library, you will find Islam usually under Eastern religion, which already kind of telegraphs to you that this is an Eastern religion, plurality of gods, foreign religion, for those people over there, that type of thing. And where we will find Christianity and Judaism, those books will be collected in a similar place. So I don't know if this is purposeful or this is just ignorance. I think it can be both sometimes. And we know there's always been a kind of misconceptions have been passed back and forth between the Christian world and the Muslim world for centuries, with the Crusades and things like that. That sort of we were calling back and forth this calling of infidels. Like if you don't believe in Jesus God, you're an infidel. If you don't believe God is one, you're an infidel. And it's been tossed back and forth. And even when I talk to my friends in Jordan, and I have Arabic, Muslim and Christian friends, they sort of bemoan the fact that they really don't know that much about each other. I think Muslims have the benefit of the doubt that we know about the people of the book. Allah speaks to us a lot about Christians and Jews and their history and comparable stories that we share. So any Muslim who reads the Quran will have some fair amount of knowledge about Christianity and Judaism, but the reverse is not true. And also there is the idea of acceptance that we not only believe in Muhammad as a messenger, we believe in Moses and Jesus and Abraham as well, whereas you would go to our Jewish brethren and they will not believe in Jesus or Muhammad, and the Christians will not believe in Muhammad. So some people have come to us as converts and said, well, they liked Islam because everybody was accepted and everybody was revered. So they found that, a very a telling point for them that the belief of Islam is very all-encompassing.
Yeah, so I want you to continue your story. You were talking, you got up to where you were in the coffee shop, and you were talking about how great and beautiful you felt the Quran was. But before you move on to that, I have one question that you mentioned earlier. You were talking about music, right? And your love with music and your singing. So when people research about Islam, they come to this point where they go, oh, music is not allowed in Islam. Okay. So what advice could you give to those out there that are having doubts about this problem where they're going to have to give up their music?
Well, I'm going to speak personally from this and from my studies. Of course, I'm a musician, and growing up, my religion, where I found God, other than in nature, we were a family that didn't find religion so much in church as we found it outside in nature. And there's a familiar saying in English that you don't find atheists in duck blinds. And my father and my brother were great hunters, and I'm quite sure that they were very well of God when they were out there in those still mornings watching the world wake up. Even though I participated a lot in religious services, I saw God so clearly in the great classical pieces of Brahms, Beethoven, Bach, who all wrote for the church. And interestingly enough, some of their most beautiful works are these liturgies for the dead. Some of the greatest pieces of all of Verdi, of Brahms, are these beautiful requiems, and you see the judgment day, come alive in front of you through the music. And music is not ever specifically said as something that is haram in the Quran. This is something that comes up in the Hadith, that people assume by some words in the Quran that it might include music. And there are some Hadith about Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that he either liked or disliked music. There are as many that he frowned with it as there are about he encouraged that some of his wives liked it, so by all means there should be music. So there's a big difference in scholarship about music, of whether it's permissible or not permissible. Certainly anything that is in praise of Allah, what we call nasheed, Islamic songs, are certainly allowable. What it comes down to sometimes is that instrumentation, there's a question about instrumentation in music, which again, there's a debate among scholars as well. For me, I see too much of God in music. And if you hear a really wonderful reciter of Quran with a beautiful voice, it's completely musical. It's very lovely. And when we look at nature, we hear the birds, and Allah gives many of us musical abilities as gifts. And I'm not quite sure why he would give someone like Itzhak Perlman such a great gift if it was something that was not to be used. A lot of us that are sort of pro-music in this sense say that so much in Islam is dependent upon your intention of how you're using something. How are you using music? Are you using it? If we listen to rap music, some of the rap music that's very disgusting and vulgar and objectifying women, this obviously is haram in every sense of the word, correct? If music is glorification of God, which again, some of the classical composers who wrote for the church and so forth, I don't know. For me, it's all about intention. I haven't let go of my music. I was never able to do that. Interestingly enough, some of our musical comrades who are musicians like Cat Stevens, now Yusuf Islam, when we first become Muslims, we're trying so hard to follow all the rules correctly because we want to do it all right. And we're so grateful to God to guide us to this beautiful way of life that we try so hard to follow all the rules and maybe go a little bit extreme in extreme directions. And Yusuf Islam is one who gave up all his music and then gradually inched his way back into it. And now he's back on stage performing. And he uses it as a way to call people or invite people to Islam, which I tend to be more in favor of that. That's a way also of showing people how we express our love and gratitude to God. Dawood Wormsby Ali, who was another very popular nasheed singer in the 90s and early 2000s. Again, he was a performing musician and just went into singing with voice only, with no musical instrumentation, but is now back to using some of his instruments as well. Not to say that that condones it, but this is something there's too much disagreement, I think, or too many different points of view, scholarship, that it's acceptable or it's not acceptable. So I am with a group that believes it's about the intention of why you're performing and what you're performing for and what is the intent of the music and so forth.
So in the same way, it could be for a listener, it would be also your intention?
Very much so, I think, because it is not specifically, God is very clear about what's haram in the Quran. It's very few things. And unfortunately, I think a lot of our scholarship now concentrates on making a lot of things haram, which are not mentioned at all in the Quran. By through some assumptions of things. And Quran is still the guidebook. No matter how much you relate to hadith and you read hadith and seerah and sunnah, the Quran is still the main guidebook. And I guess I would say that to any of the listeners, that the most important thing is to read the Quran in the language that you understand it in. If Allah is guiding you, your heart and your mind will be so open to this beautiful book. And even if people don't become Muslim, I think there's so much wisdom and logic in the Quran that can be used in our daily lives that it's very, very valuable. It's very valuable. And I wish it was talked about more in the Western world, and people would reference it more when they have questions about things or they talk about religion. Unfortunately, it's still not referenced, very little at all. We're still stuck on the, anti-terrorism things and talking about what Islam is not as opposed to what Islam is. So when I do talk about Islam, I try to talk more about what Islam is rather than being in a defensive position of what it's not. And I've found that to be very successful, especially in my interfaith groups and things like that.
So, I guess the problem for most people having to give up music is, if their main source of enjoyment from music is from, say, like pop music, popular music, or the rap music that you mentioned earlier, how would they actually try to give that up when they were in love with it and they're having this battle between themselves of having to decide between Islam or
and I will reference that by so many of the answers are in the Quran. There's so much of the history, because we had Prophet Muhammad as a prophet for 23 years. We know a lot about his life before that, but we also had 23 years of his prophethood. So much of what he said and did and gave as examples of what Allah was talking about in the Quran was available to us and has still been, translated down to us over all these centuries. And there's one example about alcohol. For example, this is something that is very clearly haram and forbidden in Islam, is to drink alcohol, or not just alcohol, but any substance that takes you away from your cognitive abilities. Again, we're talking about thinking. And one of the first verses that dealt with this, it didn't come right away. It wasn't like, you're Muslim now, you have to stop drinking. Like nowadays, you become Muslim, we hit all the poor converts with all these rules. And the people at the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, his companions, these rules came down gradually over a period of 23 years. The first talk was about letting people realize who Allah is and look at Allah's signs in the nature and his creation and so forth, and understand the logic of what Allah is and how different he is than his creation. And then when the Prophet's community, after there was persecution in Mecca, they migrated to Medina, where he was called upon to be the leader of the people there, then the more basic rulings about everyday life came into being. So this is long after people had become Muslim and had already submitted to the fact that Allah is one, and we believe in the prophets of Allah, and Muhammad is the last one. So the other rulings started to come down many, many years later. So when it wasn't immediately that alcohol, for example, which is very, very prevalent in the West, right? It's part of your culture and growing up and becoming a young man, a young woman, is to drink so much in the West. So in that culture too, people were drinking, or they were taking some sort of a substance. And the first ruling was that just don't come to your prayer after you've been drinking. Allah wants you to pray and be connecting with him. The prayer of our prayer, the Muslim prayer, is a connection to God. You're standing in front of him, you're talking to him directly. So don't come if your mind has been a bit befogged. Like the word for alcohol is fog. It fogs the brain. It comes between you and your cognitive, clear thinking abilities. So there was just that ruling, and that's in the Quran. And then there was a ruling that, yes, alcohol can be something that's beneficial for you, but it can also be harmful for you. And the harm is greater than the benefit, which we can see in the Western world, because when we see alcoholism, it's not only harmful to the person, but it's harmful to the family, the society, and so forth. And then it was made fully haram. And there is a story that when it was made fully haram, after a couple of revelations, then the people willingly poured it into the streets. They were raising a glass and they poured it out, because they had been convinced and conditioned already to be accepting of what God said and the logic behind it. So it was in stages. Unfortunately, when people become Muslim, we want them to immediately put on a headscarf if they're women, stop drinking, stop music. And if we all remember that it's always a journey, even for Prophet Muhammad himself, peace be upon him, it was a journey from the first time he received the revelation until the very last one. It's a journey for each one of us. Each one of us is individual. And what I love about Islam is Allah looks at each one of us solely. He does not look at you compared to your next door neighbor or your spouse or your sibling or your best friend. He is looking at you. These are the gifts Allah gave you, and he is going to look at you according to the gifts he gave you, according to the abilities he gave you, according to where you are in your stage of the journey, and so forth. And I worry a lot nowadays that we have people coming down very hard, that you're not perfect right away, that Allah is angry with you, there's hellfire for you, and these types of things. And I think it's a very damaging way to teach this very beautiful, positive, and merciful religion. Every chapter, except for one of the 112 chapters of the Quran, start with, in the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most forgiving, the most beneficent. And his forgiveness is something that's very easy, is sincere repentance and attempting never to do this wrongdoing again. And we are allowed to keep doing this throughout our entire life. So it's a very merciful religion. And I fear that there's a lot of teachings of it that have become so dark and punitive. And this is not the religion. And when I became Muslim, I mostly referenced what I know about Islam through the Quran. Even in the English meaning of it, I was very shocked as the years went by to see all this negative sort of punitive talk that if you don't do this right, that's it for you. And this is not the religion I found at all in the Quran. And now that I'm learning the Arabic language, it's even more merciful and more beneficent and more forgiving and more open to forgiveness from Allah for the mistakes that we make. And if we're not perfect, we're not meant to be perfect. We can never be perfect. So I think scholarship needs to take a much more beneficent and forgiving approach to how we teach Islam. And I think anybody who starts to read the Quran, you will find that. It's very, very merciful. It's very tough on people who are corrupt and people who are not merciful and people who are evil and great wrongdoers. But it is very gentle and easy on believers. And there's even a lovely verse that says to Muhammad, if you were harsh with them, if you were harsh with the people around you, you would not find them embracing Islam. You would not find them coming to you. So I think we need to take more of our cues from the Quran itself than in any other direction, inshallah. It's a beautiful, beautiful, wonderful book. And it's a lovely book because it keeps, the more you dive into it, the more it keeps opening itself up to you, and the more you can see its relevancy in today's world, in this very day today.
That sort of brings up another topic that I was going to mention and ask you about was support for new Muslims. Mm-hmm. So, many people say that when they come into Islam, they accept Islam, and then after a while, there was no real support there for them. Yes, there was the mosque. Yes, there was the Islamic organizations, but it seems like there's a lack of support for Muslims who are struggling. So the Muslim that I'm thinking of in this occasion is that the Muslim that's struggling with just what we were talking mm-hmm. about before, is that they tried to implement everything and they became burnt out.
Yeah. Exactly.
So what could you say about that?
Well, yeah, and as I said too, it's just important to remember it's your journey, and don't let anybody tell you that you have to be on their journey or what speed you have to do it, because the only one that you have an intent to please is Allah, and He's already pleased with you for every little bit that you try. I mean, even in reading Quran, we are giving so much, we call hasanat or blessings or rewards by reading every little letter, and the more you struggle with that letter, the more blessings you receive. And I think this is true about anything in Islam. The more you go to Allah, He runs to you. There's a beautiful hadith, Qudsi, about this holy hadith, sayings of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that if you walk to Allah, He comes to you running. So if you do just the least little bit for Him, He's very grateful as well. Allah is known as Ash-Shakur, the grateful, the one who thanks. He is the one who gives us everything, yet He is also thankful and grateful. So we don't have to do all that much to have Him be pleased with us, and that's what we're trying to do. And of course, anything that we do for Allah's sake, it makes our life easier in the long run as well. So I think number one is just hang on tight to the fact that, darn it, this is my journey. You don't need to meddle with it. I'm doing the best I can. I'm learning as I can at the pace I can, and so forth. And everybody's life is different. You have different things that press on you. If you're the only convert in a household, if you're a young person and you're living with your parents, you might find that's very difficult. Or you might be married and your spouse is not a Muslim. So there's all kinds of difficulties. There's some beautiful, and perhaps I can share them later on with your viewers and we can put the links up, but there are some beautiful websites now that talk about the early converts to Islam and how they were brought into Islam. And it's far different than how we bring in converts nowadays. And it talks about hiding your religion even from others, where you find they might be too much, there might be abuse, for example, or they might be punitive if they know that you're praying or they know that you're a Muslim. So the Prophet allowed his companions to hide the fact that they were Muslim initially. So there's many great initiatives that we can take from the stories of Prophet Muhammad and his companions in the early days of Islam. So again, it's not to be rushed. I'll try and add those websites too. There is another organization now, a new organization that's actually started out of Dallas through ICNA, which is the Islamic Circle in North America, called Embrace, because it's been an issue that we have not taken very good care of our converts. Because I came into Islam very strongly and I'm an outgoing person, I sort of just dove into my first Muslim communities and made myself available. And because of my background, I was sort of put on a pedestal, as a celebrity in a way. And that was very nice, but that sometimes ends for a lot of people too. When you first become Muslim, you're put on a pedestal, and then it's true that you are forgotten. I think the problem in that is that becoming Muslim in the West, we are still a new community, so we are building the Muslim community in America, and it takes time. The first thing our forefathers did here is they would build Islamic centers, they would build a mosque, they would create some place to pray. This was the first thing people did. So we had our years of finding a place to pray. Sometimes we prayed in a church, we prayed in an open, empty building. Then we started to gradually build small masajid and mosques around the United States and big cities. And my first mosque in my home state was a little house at a cornfield set at an odd angle to face the direction of Mecca. So we didn't have all these big mega mosques like we do in Dallas. So the first step of community building was simply to establish, as the Prophet did, he established a community, he established a place people could gather, not only to pray, but to gain information, also to take in the new converts. And if they were thrown out of their communities, for example, and people were, in those days, they were thrown out by their families in Mecca, they were given a place, they were given food, they were given gifts, they were given someone in the community who would take care of them and house them and provide for them. So we are trying to begin to enact those things. We started our mosques where we prayed. We started to build the community. We started to make schools for children to learn, Islamic Sunday schools, full-time Islamic schools. And now we're starting to create businesses and organizations to take care of services. For example, we have organizations in Dallas that work with women in domestic abuse. We have shelters, we have food kitchens, things like that. So now we're starting to get into the services level. And probably the converts should have been taken care of a long time ago, but perhaps the numbers weren't so great initially. Also, if Muslims are not getting out there, making themselves known and sharing their religion with others and inviting others, there might not have been as many converts in the, say, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s in America. So this is something we're trying to work with a lot in our mosques, is how we're trying to teach people how you need, number one, these are the needs of your converts. How do you take care of them? How do you teach them? You need to have special classes for them. You need to have special classes for people who are interested in Islam also. So it's a community building. I think if we go back and we look to early Jewish communities, we find the same things. The Jewish community was very smart. When I was growing up in Wisconsin, I still remember seeing signs that saying no Jews allowed, if you can imagine. The Jewish people have come a long way. They built their communities, they established their synagogues and their schools, and then they started outreach to the Christian community, teaching them who they were. We are not these people with horns that, killed your savior and so forth. They started to explain who they were. We're still, part of the book that you study and so forth. So now the Jewish community is much more accepted in the West than it was, certainly we look back to World War II. There's been a huge revolution for them and an eye-opening. So now the point that we call the, Judeo-Christian nation in America. So I think Muslims we're kind of working our way up to that point. And I've seen a vast difference in how Islam has not only spread, but has opened up and has become much more accepted, even after the horrors of 9/11. Now my neighbors greet me in Ramadan and Eid Mubarak, and they ask me how my holiday was. They put up lights alongside of me sometimes. We see storefronts advertising women in hijab and Macy's and Gap, and we see full page ads. Now we know Muslims are also, we also buy things. So they hit us with capitalism. So a lot of things that just were non-existent when I became a Muslim in the late 1980s we've come a long way in those 30 years too. We still have a long way to go, but we are not serving our convert community. But the Embrace organization, I would highly recommend people to look that up on Facebook. They have weekly halakas. Now they're all on Zoom, so you can join in those. They have a weekly Facebook time, live on Facebook on 11 o'clock on Thursday mornings, Dallas time, Central Standard Time, where they discuss, various issues that converts deal with. And I think as our community begins to understand some of the difficulties that converts, and these could be people who also are in Muslim families that suddenly become practicing that we're not practicing. There are some Muslim families that don't want their children to be that practicing, that obviously practicing. So it's not only in converts, it can be in within Muslim families too.
So it seems to me that the best way for these days for new converts to get support is to try and hang out with experienced converts and feed off their experience.
I think that also helps, and I always say the Quran is your best guide in whatever level that you can read it in English. One particular scholar I really like a lot, and I know a lot of people are listening to him worldwide, is Numan Ali Khan, because he talks a lot more about the spirit of Islam, the character of a Muslim, because how people became Muslims in those days was not someone who went out and recited beautifully in front of a crowd of people. It was their behavior. It was how honest they were. It was how genuine they were, how trustworthy, how kind, how generous. It was all the character of the Muslim that attracted people. And I think most people listening today too, they will say they like the character of Muslims that they meet. When I talk to other Muslims, they typically say they met a Muslim and they liked them so much. And statistically, if Americans have a very bad view of Islam because of the media and politics, the statistics show a big change. If anybody knows just one Muslim, whether it's their colleague at work or a fellow student at school or someone in their neighborhood, they have a totally different image of the religion by just knowing one Muslim, which says a lot for the character, our character. Our neighbors and our colleagues and our fellow workers don't see us pray, they don't see us fast, but they see how we act. They see how we treat them. They see how we act out in public. They see our generosity in hosting. They see that we try to be honest to a fault. And it's that character. I wish Muslims were concentrating more on developing our character, be in line with the Quran and the character of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and all the other great messengers, the character of Jesus also, to emulate, rather than just a lot of the rules that seem to come down on people. Don't listen to music, wear hijab, do this, do that. I would really wish that we concentrated more on developing our character as Muslims. And that's what brought me into this book. When I read the Quran, I said, I finally found a group of people that think like I do, that act the way I think is the right way to act. And I was so excited to embrace all these people, but then I found a lot of cultural aspects that were not Quranic at all, or not Islamic. So again, the best source of information is the Quran, and read it in the language that you understand, whatever that is, and find a scholar who resonates with you. I like Numan Ali Khan so much because he talks a lot about psychology, the beautiful psychology that is throughout this book, the psychology of humankind, and also the character that is so important, the character that's revealed in the stories of the Prophet and the stories that Allah reveals throughout the Quran is so important. And the most largely, densely populated Muslim countries like Indonesia, for example, there was no holy war fought there. There was no sword. There was no conquering. It was all done because of trade with the Muslim world. And now some of these nations are the most highly populated Muslim countries. And we can't say that a sword ever entered any of those countries. So it kind of goes away with the idea that Islam comes through violence and there is no compulsion of religion. There's no forcing. There's no forcing even about your hijab or what you eat or whatever. It's all about between you and Allah, that what do you want to do? What do you believe in Allah that compels you to do as He asks you to do? Out of your gratitude to Him for all the services He provides you and all the gifts He gives you. What is it you want to give back to Allah because of what He does for you? So it's very much based on gratitude, not on obedience, not on servitude, and on gratefulness to Allah. And so often Allah mentions in this Quran, He said, very few of them will be grateful. He says, very few of them will believe and very few of them will be grateful. And one of the greatest sin in Islam is called shirk, which is associating partners with God, saying that God has a partner in his deity. But it's also comes from the word shukr, which is gratefulness. So for me, not being grateful to God for all that he's provided you with in this world and in your body and in everything else you have in your life, that's the greatest sin, is not being grateful for all the favors that he gives you.
So we're coming towards the end of the episode now. I've got another question for you here. So for those people who are thinking about accepting Islam, can you explain a few of the roadblocks that are preventing people from accepting Islam in America?
I think, and this probably goes for not only people accepting Islam, but for our young people as well, too. It just seems like it's very restrictive. Like, my life will be so restricted. I can't go dancing anymore. I can't go to the bars. How am I going to meet people? How am I going to have fun? I remember a young sister came to us once saying, I believe 100%, but it seems like I'll never have fun again. And we grabbed her and we said, okay, we're going to take you on a fun day. What's restrictive, like I said earlier in the show about hijab or dressing modestly, seems restrictive in our society. But most Muslim women find it very freeing and very liberating, because we're not in a position where we are being objectified by men. You need to talk to who I am as a person. You need to talk to my character, my brain, my soul. You're not concentrating on my hair and my makeup and my beautiful figure or my hair or whatever else. I've eliminated those things from your vision. So now all you've got left to do is to talk to me as a person. And from the time, I'm coming from a stage background where I was always dressed the part and I was always objectified, I will say, everywhere on the streets and in the roles I played and everything else. It was very liberating suddenly that when I wore hijab, that I was no longer objectified or bothered in the way I had been before. And that gave me the control over that I'm the one who opens my door. I'm the one who extends my hand to someone and not the other way around. I used to be so bothered by a lot of different men in New York City, and it used to just boggle my mind. Like, I did not invite you in. Why do you think you have the right to approach me or touch me or sit next to me or whatever else was happening at the time? And I found, like, returning to New York after wearing my more modest clothes, and I just wear typical American clothes with sort of wide, loose clothing and a scarf. But I found that nobody bothered me. Nobody quite paid attention, which was fine. I mean, if you want attention, that's a sure way to get it, certainly, which is I did as a performer. But it was always that dichotomy, like, I don't mind the handsome man in the Wall Street business suit looking at me, but why the construction worker has to catcall me every time I walk by was so annoying. And the only way I found that all could stop was just to develop a more modest way of dressing, for example. So it looks restrictive. It's when you talk to someone who doesn't drink anymore and they go to a party and they watch how everyone goes into stages of drunkenness and silliness, that's very eye-opening too. Like, a lot of our young people, when they go off to college and they don't know what they can do with themselves, and they'll try going to some of the parties and then things and say, it's just crazy, this is what people consider to be fun. It's not fun. If you sit on the sober side of it, it's not very fun. So one of the things that I write about a lot, again, as I said at the beginning, or I talked maybe with you, Adee, at the beginning, that I do a lot of writing about Muslim women because I want to show that there's nothing that we can't do, really. And I think that being in a more modest framework allows us to enter a lot of spaces where before no one would concentrate on us except by what we were wearing and how we looked and how beautiful we looked. Whereas now I feel like we can function in the business world, for example, at a much more level playing field than before we were dressing for, unfortunately, how I believe, dressing for the attention of men and so forth. So those are some of the roadblocks, I think, too. And the fact that I know a lot of people you feel you'll lose family members and so forth. And a lot of converts, those family members, with the kind of character we're supposed to develop as Muslims, you find that your family members come back to you and might even become Muslims as well. You do lose some people along the way, and that's life. I mean, you lose people sometimes, no matter what you do, if you make any changes in your life. And if you go back to the stories of the early converts to Islam, those are really wonderful stories that some very great people, and Prophet Muhammad included, and most of our messengers and prophets mentioned in the Bible as well, lost people in their family circles that did not support them. They were thrown out of their hometowns. They were persecuted by people. But following the truth has never been an easy thing to do. It takes a certain kind of backbone. But if you realize what is in the Quran and the truth, the absolute, utter truth of it, it gives you that impetus to be able to withstand whatever comes your way. And Allah tends to make things easy for you too. He might give you some trials in the beginning to make sure you're in it for all the right reasons. But if you're really, really convinced about this book and really, really convinced about who and what Allah is, I think you can weather any trials that Allah sends you. And all of us are tested in trial. I mean, this is something that's very clear in the Quran. You are not necessarily blessed because you are rich and you have no problems. This is a test as well. Allah tells us over and over again, the life of this world is to be tested. But the reasons that we have these beautiful scriptures is to help us make it through these tests more easily. So when you are tested as a convert or someone trying to become a Muslim, you need to seek your solace and your comfort from the verses in the Quran. This is why it's so important to read this book a little bit every bit daily. And again, like I said, I will try and send some links to Adee about some good places to look that will help back you up as a convert and keep you solid on your journey. And you look for good companions to help you on the way. Look for those good, the most important, I think, quality to look for is sincerity in a Muslim, in your friends, in any born Muslims, in any convert Muslims, people who are out there looking for your best interests. And they're very merciful about it, and they're very easygoing with you about it. Not someone who's pushing you all the time. Do this, do that, do this, do that. You have to do it today or tomorrow. Find someone who's easygoing with you, but steady, who helps you along the way, encourages you, who's in your corner, but also understands that it's your journey and they want to help you on your journey. And it's not their journey, it's your journey. I hope that's helpful. I pray for everybody out there that's considering this beautiful religion. Just give it time and read it and just open up your heart and mind and try to put away preconceived ideas. And again, there is no compulsion. Allah wants your heart and He wants your soul. He doesn't want you in this because someone else told you have to or you should or you must. He wants you because you believe.
Okay, so I've got my last question for you now. If you could have a billboard anywhere in your city, in the busiest place in your city, and you could put a message on that billboard inviting people to Islam, what would that message be?
It's funny you mentioned that, because one of the stories I didn't tell you at the beginning was when I was in New York City, and after reading the Quran and being so convinced and taking my Shahada, becoming Muslim, I wanted to run to the top of the Empire State Building and just call down, just read the Quran. Just read the Quran. You don't know what's in this book. It will change your life. And I really felt that. And of course, you think anybody that you tell about Islam is immediately go, oh, yes, wonderful, let me read it. And that's not the case. I found out I was very idealistic. But I thought the minute I told my friends and my family who love me and know what I've been through in my life and so forth, that they would be immediately interested to look and read and accept. And that was not the case at all. So you have to be prepared for that too. But at least I'm saying, don't be afraid of this book. One thing we learn in interfaith, I'll say this, I belong to Daughters of Abraham, which is Jewish, Christian, and Muslim women, and another group called Friends for Good, which is evangelical Christians, Unitarians, Jewish community, and us, like 4 most misunderstood religions in America. And one thing everybody says that when we get together is that you don't lose your religion going and talking to other people about it. You get a deeper appreciation, because when you have to explain your religion to someone and share it with someone else, it gives you a deeper appreciation when you can put it into your own words. Why I believe what I do makes such a difference. So I'm saying, read the Quran. It's nothing scary. It's nothing frightening. It's not going to tear you away from something you believe in. It will add to what you already believe in. And if you feel like it adds so much more to what you already believe in, then be that. Then take that book, because it does encompass the Torah. It does encompass the Bible. You don't lose anything. All you do is gain. You only gain in Islam. You don't lose Jesus. You gain Jesus in a different perspective. So there's nothing to lose. There's nothing to lose in reading this book. It'll make you think. It might keep you up at night, but there's nothing to lose.
Thanks for that, Noor. Yeah, that would be a great billboard there, just with the words, read the Quran. At the start of the episode, we were talking about your story, and you were in the coffee shop, and then you were reading the Quran, and then we didn't really get a chance to finish that off. Could you give a summary of what else happened to help you to convert to Islam at that point?
Well, I actually took Shahada after about 6 months. I became Muslim after about 6 months, and I stayed in New York for a while. And because of the rulings about music, and also the idea of being on the stage, and that sort of idea of being objectified, and the kind of crazy stories there are in opera, I thought this is probably not the best venue for a Muslim woman. And I gradually worked my way out of it. I was doing some work with New York City Opera for children, so I thought that was still pretty safe. We were going around the New York City boroughs teaching children about opera. So I thought that was still pretty safe. But I kind of eked my way out of performing, and then I didn't know quite what I was going to do, and eventually ended up heading back to Wisconsin and stayed with my mother for a bit. And there was a Muslim community in my backyard in central Wisconsin. I was just flabbergasted in the early 1990s. And the community took me in, and because I had read Quran over and over and over and over and over again, I kind of shut my doors to a lot of people, because most of my friends wanted to argue with me. All my musician friends said, oh, are you ashamed of your body? You want to cover it? And Muslim terrorists. And I heard a lot of nonsense. And I knew none of it was right, but I didn't have the vocabulary, and I didn't have the knowledge to be able to speak the Quran yet. So I kind of shut my door and turned off my phone and got quiet for a while, enabling myself to be able to read Quran a lot in the English language. So I just would read it cover to cover, cover to cover. So by the time I ended back in Wisconsin, I had a pretty good knowledge of my book in the English language. And my community put me to work in teaching Islamic Sunday school on the weekends. And because I'd been working with kids and I had all this music background, I would make up these little songs and stories for the kids, because I knew they learned so quickly if you put something in story or in song form. So I would take like the Barney songs, remember Barney, or the Western nursery rhyme songs, and I would Islamize the text. And I'm a musician, a trained classical musician, so there was something of all that background going into these little songs that make them really successful with the kids. And the kids love them, and I would tell stories of the prophets that I learned in the Quran. And I eventually got married to a very nice Palestinian man, and we moved around a bit, and we would open little Sunday schools in our first apartments and homes, teaching the children. He would teach them Arabic and Quran, and I would tell my stories and sing my songs. And parents came to me and they said, Noor, you were the professional musician. We can't find Islamic songs for our kids. There's very few. Why don't you make a recording? So my husband said, well, how difficult can this be to do? So we made a very nice little recording called We Are Muslims, all Barney songs, pretty much, a few original melodies of mine. And we showcased them at a large Muslim convention. And they went viral back in the day, before things were going viral, when there was such a term. And when we saw the popularity of these little songs, and there I go making songs again, my husband had the idea, why not start a company for Muslims growing up in America in the English language? And we'll start with making audio products, and we'll just go around. And it was kind of the birth of Islamic multimedia in English in America, the early 90s. There were a number of companies that started in the United States doing multimedia, promoting books, publishing books, putting out also audio products of lectures and song stories and things like that. So there are about 3 of us, major organizations, that started in the 90s. And we would go to all the major conventions in the United States, and we would sell our wares, and we were online. And it was kind of an explosion of Islamic multimedia back then. So we started a company that my husband called Noor Art. My husband did that. And we started an online company. And to this day, about 23 years later, we're one of the largest online platforms for Muslim multimedia. We also are one of the major distributors of Islamic and Arabic studies for all the Islamic schools in North America. And now we're starting to get into the Middle East market too, in the schools that teach English. And then we also started a company of bringing goods from Islamic and Arabic goods that people enjoy from the Middle East to America, called East-West Souk. And one of my husband's babies was he wanted to start an Arabic immersion course in the summers in Jordan. And we started that a few years ago, called WAFID, for people to learn Arabic language in Jordan, where they have the ability to study during the day and then go out on the streets and use it afterwards, and also do a wonderful tour of such historic lands, biblical and Quranic lands of the Middle East, especially Jordan. So you have a chance to go and study the language in the morning, go out to the streets and practice your language immersion, and then also see the beautiful sights, ending up in a trip to Jerusalem at the end of the summer. So those are our 3 companies. And I think all of it started off because I was this really crazy convert that wanted to this incredible gift of becoming Muslim. I wanted to give so much back to Allah, and still at the age of 67, I'm still giving back as much as I can and hope I do to my dying day, because I can never be grateful enough for Allah guiding me to this beautiful way of life. And I feel like I was gifted with 2 lives. I had a wonderful life as a performer. I cannot say enough about that life and how blessed I was to sing where I did and sing the pieces with the people that I sang, the highest level of music making in the world. That was an amazing, amazing profession, and I loved every minute of it. And then I happily closed that chapter and opened up a new one, and my life has been even more blessed being a Muslim. I've traveled the world. I know people from all over the world. Being a Muslim is so cool because you get to try all the great foods of the world, and you get to meet Muslims from all over the world. It's amazing. If you come to our masajid in Dallas, we call it United Nations because you have people from every country in the world here. And that's for someone who always likes to know people who are different than I am. This has been a great, great joy of mine to know so many beautiful people and know so many different cultures. And yet we all have certain phraseology that we know. We say hello to each other in a certain language. We thank God in a certain language that we all understand, whether we're from China or India or America or the Middle East. We have a certain vocabulary we all understand. We all pray the same way. We all know the same verses of the Quran in Arabic. It's really an amazing global community. And if you have the opportunity to make Hajj, the great pilgrimage, or the smaller one, Umrah, it's really quite an amazing thing to see all those people gather from all over the world and end up doing the same thing at the same moment with a single leader in front of us. It's really quite an amazing thing. I get off topic a lot, but there's a lot to say.
Yeah. Thanks.
I appreciate everybody's patience with me. There's a lot to say.
Very interesting indeed. Yeah, thanks so much. And really thankful for all your good advice today as well. It's been a pleasure to hear it all.
And if there's some way I can send you links, if there's some way that you can, on a website or whatever, easy links for the converts or people who are even interested in Islam to look at, I'd be happy to share those with you.
Yeah, please send me the links and I'll put them into the show notes here. And I can also put them onto our website.
Wonderful. Good resources.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, so, and you've also, it looks like you've done a lot of good work. You're helping the Muslim community worldwide with all your resources, all the things you're producing, and your education for people that want to learn about Arabic. This is excellent. And I'll put the links for those into the show notes as well if anyone's interested. Okay, Noor, so thank you so much for coming onto the show once again, and really was a pleasure to hear your story.
You're very welcome. I wish everyone a beautiful journey.
Yes.
Inshallah, God willing.
God willing. And hopefully, there was so many things that we didn't talk about today. We would love you to have you on for another episode. So maybe in the future we can have you on again.
Sure, I'd be happy to. As you see, I have way too much to say. Sorry.
That's perfect for us. Okay, Noor, so I'll have to leave you now. So may the peace and blessings of God be upon you and to all our listeners out there. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Thank you so much.